Boston Dome. A special hello goes out to the director of media for the Boston Dome's alumni, Mr. Mark Willand. Nice to meet you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Willand. Randy Manery, the Flames franchise first ever All-Star, is our guest on episode 31 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. A steady defenseman who could carry the puck, Randy played 592 NHL games with the Atlanta Flames, Detroit Red Wings, and LA Kings. He was named the Flames representative in a 1973 NHL All-Star game in New York, and later in his career was twice voted to be the top defenseman on the LA Kings. In this interview, Randy recalls the early days of hockey in the Deep South, colorful personalities like Pat Quinn, Boom Boom Geoffrion, and Tom Lysiak, the trade to LA, life on the West Coast, and the life challenges he faced upon retirement. Just a reminder to subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating on iTunes because this helps more people find these old-time hockey interviews. You can reach us at prohockeyalumni@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments, and you can find us at Pro Hockey Alumni anywhere on the web. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Randy Manery. We're back on the show with the very first Flames franchise All-Star and longtime defenseman for the Flames and the Los Angeles Kings, Randy Manery. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you.
Randy, going back to juniors, you begin your career with Hamilton in the OHA. Now, that was a Red Wings back the way things were arranged back then. I'm assuming the Red Wings owned it, and you had to sign a C form back in those days. But can you recall how you initially were approached by the Detroit organization and ended up playing in Hamilton?
Yes, it was certainly a different system, and you're right. There was the C form, which when you signed that C form, you belonged to that NHL club forever. But I remember my experience with Detroit really well because I got a letter in the mail telling me that Detroit had drafted me, and quite different than what we see today on TV and everything. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because I'd only been to like 2 NHL games in my life. Never been to a junior A game, and so I didn't know what the next step would be. But a couple of weeks later, Jimmy Skinner called me, and Jimmy was the head scout for the Red Wings at the time.
Right.
He called, congratulated, said, blah, 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 and by the way, we want you to go to Hamilton to play junior A. And I don't know what overtook me that day, but I said, Jimmy, I really appreciate the opportunity, but I don't think I'm going to be able to go. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, well, my parents really want me to be, the first member of the family, not only to get out of high school, but to go to college and to graduate. And I said, and I just don't see how playing for you in Hamilton is going to help me get to college.
That's so pretty, by the way, that's pretty, that not too many people do that. I think you must have been, 16, 17 years old at the time.
Yeah, just turned 17, and I don't know what overtook me as well, but I remember Jimmy said used a few hockey phrases and hung up. And I thought, well, whatever that opportunity was, it's gone. And a couple weeks passed and the phone rang, and it was Jimmy calling back. And he said, Randy, he said, this is what we're going to do. He said, you want to go to college, right? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, so we want you to go to Hamilton. There's a really good university there, McMaster University. And I said, yeah, that's one of the top schools in Canada. And Jimmy said, well, we will pay for the rest of your high school. We'll pay for all of your college. But here's the deal. You have to go to Hamilton. You have to make the team. And you can never fail an exam of any kind while you're there.
Wow.
You will not miss any practices. You will not miss any games. You'll always be available when the team needs you. And if you can do that, then we'd like for you to come to Hamilton. I said, Jimmy, I don't know whether I can get into McMaster or not. They really require high grades. And he said, that's not my problem. This is what you asked for, and are you interested? And I said, I am. And so I went to Hamilton, and wasn't until I got to Hamilton that I realized that in the previous 25-year history of the league that only one player had successfully gone, so I'm told, had successfully gone to college and played junior A, and that was Pitt Martin.
Wow.
But the year that I went to Hamilton, there were three of us. There was Rick Smith, who eventually went to Golden Seals and played in Boston for quite a while.
Yeah, I just was, funny you mentioned Rick. I was just with Rick a week ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he came up for the Ace Bailey Foundation dinner, so we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Seals and all that. So just coincidental, but I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and Lee Carpenter, another the real student amongst the three of us, who I don't believe played pro hockey, maybe a little, I'm not sure, but anyway, there were the three of us, and that made it a little bit easier because the three of us, even though the demands were the same, there was three of us to kind of pull together to, get through school and to encourage each other, because it was a difficult thing to do, but we all made it.
What was the experience like in Hamilton? The league in the OHA at that time, when you were playing against, let's say, the Toronto Marlboros, which would have a sellout crowd at Maple Leaf Gardens. It was big-time junior hockey, to be sure. What was that experience like?
It was terrific. It was quite a change from my little hometown of Leamington, where we would, your parents and maybe 50 other people or so, or if you get into the playoffs, you might have a few hundred people come out. So like you just said, you go to play the Marlies in Toronto at the Garden, then it would be sold out. And you go to Montreal to play the Junior Canadians, and, another full crowd. And it was that way around the entire league because there were just, 6 teams in the league at the time, and so in the NHL. So all the kids playing in the OHA, most of them, or quite a few of them, were destined to play in the National Hockey League. So for a couple dollars, people could come see the, future stars or players of the NHL, playing at a much younger age.
Yeah, absolutely. You go through those rosters, and up and down every roster, including Hamilton's, you see or at least 10 pros, and a foretelling of what hockey would be in the 60s and 70s in many ways.
It was really exciting. It was quite a change, like I say, from minor league hockey in a small town, but at the same time, it was a huge opportunity, a real personal growing experience, because you were, living in a boarding house and traveling a lot of bus travel. It was just a real opportunity, I guess, for me, to kind of mature a little bit more and to become disciplined, which would help me, throughout the rest of my life. And I credit a lot of that to the early years of playing and trying to go to school and new city. All those things all at once really brought the best out of me, I believe.
When did you go to your first Detroit Red Wings training camp, and what was that experience like?
So that would have been in 67, 68, before the beginning of my second year in Hamilton. And, I was, at that time, you couldn't turn pro until 20. Bobby Orr had just broken that. They maybe changed that rule for Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
I'd forgotten. But at the time, for most of the rest of us, it was 20 before you could turn pro. So it was a real honor to be able to go, and a real eye-opener once again for me to see just how much bigger and faster the guys were, and how much quicker the game was. But it was really good for me to be able to have that experience of a couple of weeks, then come back, to Hamilton and go for the second year.
It had to be incredible, though, to go to that camp and see the likes of Gordie Howe and Alex Del Vecchio, among others.
It really was, and they were very kind, very generous in their time. Nobody went out of their way to make me look bad. They all made me feel, as welcome as they could. But you probably remember back then as well, there were well over 100, guys that were at training camp at that time, because each NHL team had 4 or 5, teams, including the NHL team, that had rosters to fill. So they always brought a lot of guys into camp. But it was just good to be there with that bigger group, for sure.
Back, you mentioned Bobby Orr, who was a rarity because he had played at 18 at the NHL level, but particularly among defensemen. Back then, defensemen were rarely rushed into the fray of the NHL, and took some seasoning. And with that in mind, you joined the Fort Worth Texans. and you played there for almost three full seasons. What was the experience like of playing in Fort Worth, Texas, back in the 1960s and early 70s?
Well, it was interesting. Had a lot of fun. Met a lot of great people. The people in Texas were and still are, very friendly, very welcoming people. The interesting thing, and also the biggest challenge in that league, was that the majority of the arenas were actually, the ice arenas were actually, ice surfaces were set down in the middle of rodeo arenas.
Oh, really?
And so you would dress in the rooms that might be where the cattle or the horses came through, during the rodeos. And you walk down, so you'd walk into the first set of boards around there, which is where the rodeo size, to get to the ice and the ice boards. So that was kind of unique. I remember going to Kansas City at the time, which was in the Central League as well, and we played the American Royal, and the dressing rooms there were in like a gondola type of situation up over the stockyards, where they kept the cattle. So it was, and the league was really spread out. I mean, it was Fort Worth, Dallas, and then there was Tulsa and Oklahoma City, Amarillo, Omaha, Kansas City. 1 year Iowa had a team in the league, and we did almost everything by bus, and so it was a lot of time spent, bussing around. But that's what the minor leagues are all about. How badly do you want it?
It's funny you say that. I was going to ask you that same question because you've got college education under your belt. You have other options, and you're playing in a reused rodeo arena or whatever you want to say. It's a lot of bus travel. So you've got, as you said, you've got to really want it at that point. You're focused on making the National Hockey League.
Right. Well, I knew that. I shouldn't say I knew that, but I really felt like after the second time I went to the Red Wing camp, just before my final season in Hamilton, I really believed that I could play at that level. Mm-hmm. And so when I gave myself 3 years, because I knew I wouldn't get an opportunity to go directly to Detroit, so I gave myself 3 years. And fortunately for me, after the third year, the Atlanta Flames were brought into the league, and Cliff Fletcher and Boomer seemed to like my style and my way of play, and so they brought me into Atlanta, and that was a huge opportunity for me.
Was there any time during that 3-year stint, however, where you maybe just questioned yourself and got down and just wondered if it was worth it?
Yes, there was. The third year, my final year in Fort Worth, because someone in Detroit made a determination that maybe I wasn't as good a defenseman as I could be a forward, and so they moved me up to the right wing, and really wasn't very comfortable up there. I scored quite a few goals, and I even got called up to Detroit to play right wing one night in Chicago. Gordy was hurt, and so I played with Alex and I want to say Papin, but I don't remember for sure. We played against not Papin. Forgot who was on the other wing, but then we played against Makita Hall and Papin all night long. Mm-hmm. That was pretty interesting, but it was a little discouraging too, because that's not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the NHL, but I wanted to be there on defense.
Was that game in Chicago?
It was.
So that had to be, regardless of the fact that you're playing out of position, putting on that Red Wings jersey and skating out on the ice with Gordie Howe, Alex Delvecchio, and the Detroit Red Wings in Chicago with a packed house against some of the all-time greats of hockey. It had to be kind of surreal for you as you're looking around there. At least it would be for me, seeing all those greats, and here you are.
Yeah, it was. It was a great night. It was a great time. But like I said, when I went back down to Fort Worth, it was like, I just don't know. Mm-hmm. I was excited to be there, but I also knew the right wing wasn't going to be the way that earned me into an opportunity to play in the National Hockey League.
How did you find out you were an Atlanta Flame?
I don't really remember. One of the advantages and disadvantages of living in the South is that a lot of the things that happened along the way, people haven't asked me about for years. And I'm sure I got a phone call, but I don't remember. I just don't remember who it was from.
Hockey in the Deep South. You've got Boom Boom Jeffrey on coaching, and it's an interesting group of defensemen who joined you, and it felt like you fit your talent level of being able to move the puck and step into the offense was perfect for a team where you had guys like Pat Quinn, Noel Price, Arnie Brown, Ron Harris, Noel Picard, some real grizzled veterans who were very defensive oriented and physical. And yourself, I thought it was a great opportunity for you. What was it like, I guess, with those guys like Pat Quinn, and were they mentoring? And I assume they were, and you must have learned a lot from playing with a group like that.
Well, we went to the first training camp. I think it was in Drummondville, and they put Pat and I together right away, and neither Pat nor I were really sure that we were going to make the team. We seemed to be, third or fourth set of defensemen, but our styles really complemented one another because Pat was a grinder, and he could really take care of that side of it, and I could move with the puck. And so between the two of us, we developed a style to where, we played off of each other's strengths, and quite quickly, I think, Pat and I became the mainstay for the defense for the team for that first year. We developed really strongly, and you can't help but play with someone like Noel Price, who just brings so much experience, and he's such a gentleman, such a family man. So he brings so much to the table, both on and off the ice. And then there were others like Ronnie Harris, that were just constantly, working on their weights and their strength, and so there was just a lot to learn from in different ways from everybody. So, and I think on a first-year expansion team, which according to the press in Montreal, I remember reading on them when we went in there for our first time, was that we were the worst collection of professional hockey players in the history of the National Hockey League. Drew us all together pretty tightly, and because we knew we didn't have all the great guns and all the great best defenseman in the league. We had great goaltending, and we had a coach that understood all of those things. And Boomer was just great, and he got us quite a ways through the season before we just realized we didn't have the depth to be able to hang in there. When the good teams were really starting to pick it up, we didn't have another gear.
You guys were respectable because you had a solid defense, and as you mentioned, very strong in net with Dan Bouchard and Phil Mayer. Talk a little bit about that interesting dynamic, because for your duration of the time that you were in Atlanta, you had the unique situation of having two top-level goaltenders. And talk a little bit about that dynamic and what that meant to the franchise.
Well, I think it was good for both Dan and Phil because they really they're two different men from every which way. Personalities, goaltending style. I mean, they were just unique to each other, but they both had an incredible desire to win and to play. They both wanted to be number one, and so they pushed each other really, really hard. But for those of us in front of them, we knew that whoever was in net, we had a pretty good chance if we played our part to win the game, or at least be competitive and get through to the end of the game where there was a chance to win the game. Dan was a little more of a firebrand. He was involved in, kind of upsetting things every once in a while, where Phil was more of a, kind of an encourager. So just like I said, just two totally different guys. But I don't think any expansion team could have asked for anything more, with the two back of the two goaltenders that we had.
Absolutely. Now, it's important for you guys to be competitive because you are playing in the Deep South for the first time, and you need to get out of the gates quickly as far as fan support is concerned. But how was the fan support in year one?
Fan support was awesome. You're right. The people really knew very little about hockey, and at the time, 1972, I think Atlanta had somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 people. So it was a very small city that was on the rise, but still was a very small audience. So a lot of the folks from up north hadn't moved in yet. So it really was kind of a Deep South culture. I think the league kind of set us up. Maybe the league didn't believe we were going to be incredibly successful that year, because we ended up playing four of our first 5 games on the road, and maybe 10 of our first 12. But I remember the first night we did come into the Omni, we were playing Buffalo, and they were still bolting seats in.
Wow.
When we went out to the warm-up, but And I looked up into the stands, people were all dressed up. They had suits on, and the ladies had their nicest coats on. I think it was really, not that people in the rest of the league didn't dress well, but it just seemed to be this was a special night out for the fans. You could tell. And I remember we got our first shot on net, and the crowd all cheered, and it was kind of like, okay, what is this all about? But they got really excited. They loved the physical play because the folks in the South love football. They of all kinds, high school, college, pro ball, and that became one of our biggest problems in the South, especially in the first half of our hockey season.
Right.
Was the high school, college football that drew so many thousands of people out of the city. Didn't leave much for us. But no, we got invited to more homes for dinners, more events, for speaking, and with a personality like Boomer, as coach, he drew a lot of attention, to the team as well. So it was a fun city to live in and play in. Especially the first couple of years, it was really exciting.
You are selected to play in the 1973 NHL All-Star Game. Do you remember how you heard about that selection, and what was your reaction?
Well, Boomer told me, and I just, Boomer's a big kidder, and so I thought he's just pulling my chain here big time because, I was having a good season. The team was playing well. But I didn't know that I would be considered, for that honor, and so it was a big surprise. And I just, I guess in hindsight, I wish that I'd have had a second, opportunity because I know I would have enjoyed it more than I did the first one because I was so nervous.
Where was the game that year?
It was in New York.
Oh, right.
And so that was great. We were at all the pre-game ceremonies and things were at the Waldorf Astoria, and it was just once again, the year before I'd been in Fort Worth, and just a couple of years before that I'd been in Hamilton, and so for me it was a long way from Leamington by way of Hamilton to Fort Worth, and all of a sudden I'm in New York playing, with the best players in the world at the time, and it was just an exciting night. I was the only rookie in the game that night, and so I was interviewed in between periods. My mom and dad, got to see me interviewed,
wow.
On top of playing in the game. So it was an exciting night for not only for me but for my family as well.
Randy, the next year, the Flames draft Tom Lysiak, number one in the draft. Obviously, he becomes a big part of that Flames franchise, and of course, Tom passed away a few years back. But I was curious, looking back at Tom, what your memories are of him as a player and a person.
Tommy was the guy that everybody loved. The fans loved him. The teammates. He was the kind of guy you could really coalesce around. Even the opposition guys had to appreciate him because he had a natural ability to play the game that. He knew what he could do and what he couldn't do. He played it really well. He was tough when he needed to be. He didn't mind scrapping with anybody. He'd go into the corners for the puck, or he'd stand out front and take a beating. But when the night was over, when the game was over, Tommy was ready to go out and party. He was just a good guy. And but I guess the biggest challenge he had is that Tommy didn't want to have all that pressure of being the guy. And so that made it really hard because there was high expectations for Tommy. Everybody believed that he could be a 50-goal scorer every year. And whether he could have or not, I don't know. He played well, but he was also very happy to be the second guy or the third guy. He didn't have to be number one, and I think he really played better when he wasn't expected to be that number one guy. But it was hard for him to ignore that or to avoid it because everybody looked to him for that. And Tommy was a super guy, just a super young man.
I've talked a little bit about the change of hockey. The Flames are getting a little bit bigger in the 1970s. Guys like Willie Plett and Eric Vale, Kenny Houston, So you're kind of matching the increase in size around the league. And of course, the Broad Street Bullies kind of ushered that era in 73, 74. Hey, as a matter of fact, too, if you're on YouTube, the only YouTube clip of Randy Manery is having a fight with Mike Corrigan, my good friend, with the Los Angeles Kings, and you coming out on top of that. But I'm curious about the intimidation factor in hockey at that time. And you guys had a historic brawl with the Philadelphia Flyers, but the game changed a lot in a few short years. And I just want to get your thoughts on that environment at that time.
The game changed really quickly. You're right. And the league wasn't ready for it. They didn't have all the necessary rules in place because nobody had really played like that before, with the intimidation, the multiple guys in a fight, concept of instead of the two toughest guys from two teams, fighting, all of a sudden it became kind of like, let's take the best guy out.
Right.
So in the past where you wouldn't bother or Maurice Richard or Dickie Duff or whoever those little guys, the smaller players were, all of a sudden it was okay to take a run at a Marcel Dion or some of the smaller, more talented, guys and get them out of the game. And that was just one of the many, many facets of the game that changed. And in Atlanta, gosh, we built, Cliff and Boom and then Fred Creighton built a big team. I mean, you're right, with Pat and Willie and Kenny Houston and Eric, and then Kurt Bennett, was there, and then Butch Deadmarsh came in, and it was not Hillary Graves was there for a while. It wasn't big, but what could really put a hurt on you with one of his checks. Yeah. We had some great games because you could not intimidate us. But the thing is that I always thought our challenge is that our team never went looking for it. Whereas Philadelphia would come out right, drop the puck and go after it. We waited to be for somebody else to instigate against us. And so a lot of nights, there are teams we should have beaten physically as well as score-wise, but we never quite got to it because they left us alone.
Right. Your big guys could play.
Exactly. Willie score goals, Eric score goals, Kenny Houston score goals. They all could, and that's what they wanted to do. I mean, they obviously they weren't afraid to go in and drop the gloves either. But everybody plays the game to be able to to score, and that's the fun part of the game. The fighting part of the game is a grind, and yes, you can get your own recognition that way as well. But I don't know of anybody who'd rather go and score 25, 30, 40, 50 goals and gain their recognition that way rather than being the team enforcer or one of the enforcers.
The Flames go on solid through the 70s, and you get traded to the Los Angeles Kings. I was curious what your reaction was to be traded out to the West Coast.
Well, initially, I was really disappointed and really upset because the end of the previous season, I got married, and before I got married, I went in to see Cliff, and I said, Cliff, getting ready to get married, I'm looking at buying a home. I said, now, just tell me up front, is this a wise thing for me to do, or should we just rent? And he said, no, Randy. He said, go ahead and buy. He said, you're going to be here for a while. He said, you're one of the mainstays. And it was very complimentary and very nice. And so I went and bought a house.
Of course.
And things changed. And so disappointed, obviously. But then I thought, LA has finished ahead of us, the last 2 or 3 years, maybe every year that I was in Atlanta. And we always had a difficult time beating them. And so I thought, well, it's never bad when a team above you reaches down and likes you enough to bring you in. And so I started to look at it from a different standpoint. And going to L.A., Ron Stewart was the coach the first year.
Yeah.
And he was a lot like Boomer in that he was old school. He just assumed that you knew how to play the game, and that was my responsibility to play the game and to get myself in shape. And his responsibility was to be the coach. And I always felt that Ron and Boom had that old school thing where when the old 6-team, kind of philosophy, if you didn't want to play, there were 6 guys playing one league below you that were almost as good as you anyway, maybe younger. And so if you couldn't do it, fine. There's somebody else. There was no big deal, and I think that was some of their philosophy. Not so much on the technical side of the game, maybe, but more on the being the encourager, the guy that come along, gave you the pat on the back, or just try to get you going one way or the other. But both of them were gentlemen, and neither one of them would disparage you in the press.
Mm-hmm.
They would pull you aside one-on-one, but never in public, and I really appreciated that.
What was the atmosphere? I've talked to a few players who played in L.A., and you're playing in the fabulous Forum. You're in the middle of all the Hollywood hoopla and a lot of distractions, potentially. Of course, you're newly married, a little different than being a single guy. But what was the overall atmosphere like playing for the L.A. Kings in the 70s?
Well, when I first went out there, it was really good because Rogie Vachon was the goaltender, and with all due respect for Phil and Dan, Rogie was by far the best goaltender I ever played in front of, and he was a good man as well. Everybody really loved Rogie, and then Butch Goring was there, and Marcel was there, and we had had a very competitive team. The crowds were good. The big thing about Los Angeles that there's so many. You're right. There are so many distractions. You can go to the beach. You can go to Hollywood. You can do whatever you want to do. But I think the team in general was pretty good about keeping everybody in line. Hockey didn't have the same draw for the big name actors, actresses, whomever you're talking about that say basketball did. But we still had our opportunities to get out and to get around the community. Had a lot of fun that way. But quite honestly, playing in LA came with a price, and the price at the time was the road trips.
Oh yeah, right.
The league was not set up. Everybody played equal number of games against every team, and so being on the West Coast, other than Vancouver at the time, that was the only other same time zone team that we played against. Then you had to come to Kansas City, I think, for maybe a year or so, but then it was Chicago and St. Louis, and then the big swings through the East. They were really grueling, really long trips that were, as I learned after going out there to play, they were just patently unfair.
Absolutely.
For the league. So
it was, boy, I tell you, when I had talked to Mike Corrigan, he reminded me of the year they played the Bruins in the first round, and it was 2-2, 1-1-1. They had a 7-game series. So it was back East Coast, West Coast, East Coast, West Coast, and it was brutal. But, you look at the research that's been done, even for myself personally, if I had to make a flight to the West Coast and then to the East Coast or whatever, it, like everybody else, it takes a while to adjust. Never mind stepping out on the ice with a team that's waiting for you in the Boston Garden with a day's rest or whatever. Yeah, as you said, it was very unfair. But the one thing about the league now is because it's a lot more geographically. What's the word I'm looking for? Geographically favorable to teams in the West Coast. So.
Right, that's good, because I remember we used to do the one trip I always hated from LA is that we would we'd do Philadelphia on Thursday, Montreal on Saturday, and Boston, on Sunday, and you'd go, really? Because there was not a sleeper in there at all. You had to come in with your A game, or you're going to get, physically beat or skated into the ice, and then go into Boston and maybe get both done to you. So you had to be ready to get up and go, and so that was the kind of thing that made the LA situation, just really a little more difficult than some of the other teams had.
Randy, who you played against the best of the best and some of the all-time greatest? Who is the best player you ever played against?
Well, I think Bobby Orr for sure. Gretzky was just coming in, to just kind of getting into his zone when I left the game after that 1980 season.
Mm-hmm.
But I was blessed to be able to play with, Gordie Howe and Alex and all those early on, and again Stan Mikita and Bobby Hall and that group, and then come along through the Orr, the Orrs and the Espositos and all the great guys, were in Montreal. just so many good. Brad Park was playing back then. Cornway was still playing. Keon and all those guys. So, and then at the end, the new group were coming through. The Gretzky and his group were coming in. So, really blessed to kind of be able to play with almost 3 eras of All-Stars, Hall of Famers. Just a really special time.
Randy, an interesting thing happens too is that your brother Chris ends up playing in the National Hockey League, and I'm assuming at some point you played against him.
I did. Yeah.
And,
he was in Cleveland.
Right. So that has to be a great experience for your family and yourself. Do you remember that first time that you two would have opposed each other on the ice?
I do, because it was a fun night. Because you're right. First of all, you're playing against your brother, and that's always fun. But then Cleveland isn't that far from our hometown in southern Ontario, and so a lot of our friends and some family members and things made the drive around to Cleveland for the game, and so it was kind of like a little bit of a homecoming. It was fun to play against my brother. It was just a good night. I don't remember if we won or not, but I just remember it being a good night. And Chris had a great career at the University of Michigan, and came out and just never quite got the opportunity to showcase all of his gifts, his talents. But he had a really good career at the time in the NHL, and then went to Europe to play, and so he got a lot of hockey under his belt, and has a lot to be proud of and what he was able to accomplish. So
absolutely, and for your family, having 2 brothers in the National Hockey League, very, very rare indeed. I just wanted to ask one last question about the LA experience. Actually, sure. I had 2 quick ones. Number one, who were you primarily paired with on defense back then? I remember reading at some point it was Dave Hutchinson, slightly different style than yours, of course, but who, if anyone, did you pair with the most over that 3-year stretch?
Well, I did start out with Dave, and Dave was much more like Pat Quinn. And Pat and I had played together for 5 years, roomed together for 5 years. Our families were really close. And then going to LA, Dave was that same kind of tough, aggressive, guy. And then played a little bit with Larry Brown. And then I think things they started to bring in some different younger players and things. So I played with Wells, Jay Wells, the one season, his first season. I played a lot with Jay. So there was a little more of a rotation around. I don't remember playing with any one guy all that, like I had with Pat in Atlanta.
The one more guy I wanted to mention, you had mentioned earlier, but in your last 2 seasons with LA, you start to see the formation of the Triple Crown line, where Charlie Simmer kind of comes out of nowhere to kind of complement that unit. But, of course, making it all go at center is Hall of Famer Marcel Dion. What your recollections of Marcel on and off the ice?
Marcel was a very gifted, really worked hard, but a very gifted, very compact, center. Really strong skater, physically strong upper body. He just happened to be on a team that was, at that particular time, with Philadelphia coming into the league, changing the style of their play, that LA was never that grinding team. And so, Marcel took a fair amount of punishment on the ice, as did Butch Goring and the smaller, centers, because we weren't that kind of team that was going to be able to go after, the game after game, go after the other guys on the other team. And so it made it difficult for them, but they played incredibly well, and certainly were, among the best players, on our team. Marcel off the ice, was a interesting guy as well. He loved to play. He loved hockey, but he also enjoyed being with the guys off the ice. And all in all, things. He was a pretty good guy. Once again, I was probably one of the more conservative guys, in the group. And but like I say, Marcel had a great family and really, really enjoyed playing hockey and really, really enjoyed being a leader on the team. So that was good.
Randy, I've read a couple accounts of the end of your career, which was rather abrupt. One said you had an eye injury, and the other said you had a blood disorder. How did things end for you in Los Angeles?
They didn't end well. I'm going to be very honest with you, but that's the way it happens a lot in hockey or in any sport as far as that goes. But my first 2 years in LA were really good. I mean, I played really well. Won some individual team awards. I mean, things were really well. Now, in the summer leading up to my third season, I thought, I'm just going to tweak my training program, my off-season training program a little bit so I can, even have a better year this third year. And I tweaked it too much, and I ended up hitting training camp. I really picked up my running in the off-season, that third season, off-season. And I found out that my body wasn't built for running. And by the time I got to training camp, instead of building myself up, I'd actually tore myself down. And I developed a blood disorder. And so I went to training camp. I had no strength. I just felt like I'd done nothing, all year, all summer long. And so I missed quite a few games, quite a few weeks right off the bat. And then I came back, and I was quite a bit behind when it came to, game conditioning and getting my game up. And then it was after the new year. We were at practice one day and just warming up. You shoot pucks at the goalie and they bounce off, and the goalie hits them this way or that way with his stick. Well, it just so happened somebody shot one and it bounced off of the goaltender's glove, and the goalie just took his stick and just like he knocked it to the corner like he would any other time.
Yeah.
The timing was such as I came through just as he swung the stick.
Yeah.
And his stick took me in my left eye, and ended up getting about 40 stitches. It's in the inside corner of my left eye. And
oh, it's scary.
I ended up, very, and I ended up missing the rest of the season. And when I came back that next fall, there was no. They had made some trades in the off season and had made some moves, and there was no real place for me on the roster, and so that's the way it kind of ended for me. Right.
What's it like 1980, and for the first time you're not going out on the ice and playing a National Hockey League schedule? Obviously you have your education in your back pocket, but there still had to be quite an adjustment for you in the early stages.
It was scary. I remember my wife and I were sitting on our front porch in Los Angeles, and I just found out what was going on. So she and I were talking about it, and I said to her, "Hun, we can go to Florida." That's where my wife had been raised, in Florida, but I met her in Atlanta. I said, "We can go back to Florida." I said, "We can go home to my hometown in Canada. We can go to Leamington, or we can go back to Atlanta." I said, "It really doesn't make any difference because wherever we go, we're starting over." So we talked about it for a while, and we decided to go back to Atlanta because that's where both of us had our best, single experience, and that's also where we'd really knew more people, and we both felt like that would make a better home, for us. And so we headed back for Atlanta and started looking for a job, and that became an interesting experience as well. So,
well, at the time, I think about this being in your position where your identity. You've done something very, very special. You've been at the peak of your profession in the National Hockey League, and you're doing your work with immediate feedback with 15,000 customers, and just your overall identity of being Randy Manery, NHL hockey player, and now that is not the case. And I'm just curious of your mindset as now your wife and you are back in Atlanta, and what's your next step? What got you going, and what had you decided to do at that point?
Well, we went back to Atlanta, and I thought that I still believed that I could play. I had really felt that I had another 3 or 4 years that I could play in the NHL.
Absolutely.
So I thought, let's try to go to Europe, and so that just never worked out for me. For some reason, whatever the reasons might have been, I was never able to catch on with the team, and I guess so. That would be I was getting near the end of being 1 year out of hockey, And we didn't make a lot of money, and so it wasn't like I had millions to sit on. I had to get a job. Something had to happen, and so I was interviewing. Everybody that I interviewed with wanted me to go into sales. I didn't want to go into sales. I did not want to sit in front of people and ask them to buy, beer or not laptops at the time, but insurance or whatever it may be. And I wasn't interested in that. But everybody I met with said the same thing. Other than that, we realize you have a college education, but you have no business experience. You're 30 years old. Sales is the thing that we have for you. And so we ended up buying a business. We bought a dry cleaning store.
Oh, really?
So we bought one, and then we added to that. We started managing some, and we bought one, and then we bought a Baskin-Robbins ice cream store, and then I bought a light construction company. And there's no comparison between that. Looking back now, I just go, my goodness, Randy, how could you possibly have made all three of those things work? Because there is no commonality in any of them. But we did that for 11 years, and it was probably the most difficult 11 years of my life. Just a real struggle, understanding business, understanding people, understanding employees, trying to get used to the demands of customers, unrealistic at times, I would think. And also found that it took a lot of work to make some profit and to be able to get a paycheck for yourself every 2 weeks as well. So,
sure.
But it was a real life lesson, and I was very blessed, quite honestly, looking back on it. I was given 11 years of professional hockey plus the 3 in Hamilton, and then I was given 11 years of experience in, quote, the real world, with small business. And when we sold the businesses, I kind of thought, we haven't been very successful at this. I mean, we didn't lose any money, but we didn't leave with big bank accounts either. But in hindsight, I found out that something like 60% or something of first-year businesses all fail within the first 3 years, I think it is. And then of those that go beyond 3 to 4 years, maybe at 5, 6, 7 years, another 15% of those fail.
Yeah, I was going to quote stats like that to you as you were talking about the various businesses that you had in different industries. That is to keep that going for 11 years and pay people and, like you said, deal with customers, the economy, everything that can be thrown your way. It is a great lesson for yourself. And that is, like you said, kind of like the school of hard knocks. You learn everything when you're running a business. You're on the front lines, you're in the back office, you're marketing, sales, customer service, everything under the sun. So by the time you're done with that, it's almost like another education in and of itself for 11 years. For sure. But it seems like a lot of things in life, for me, nothing's been really easy, or I've made it difficult for myself too. So, but that was just another chapter and another very beneficial one, as I would find, when I finally got out of business. Right. Now, Randy, you take your career in another direction in the nonprofit world, and now with Cure International, you're helping do some very, very special things out there. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in 1990, like probably several, I know, like with Dan Bouchard and several others, probably post hockey, and we played with Eddie Kia, who had a really strong faith. And I was raised in the church. It's just that during the hockey years, it's pretty tough to stay. At least back then, it was pretty tough to stay, in church all the time with the schedule and the travel and everything. Right. But after I got out, my faith became very important to me. And in 1990, I was given an opportunity to, more or less get into sales. The thing that I thought I would hate the most, but in this case, it was in fundraising and what we call development. And so for the last almost 30 years, I've been in development, working with I worked 18 of those years with a group, actually 20 of those years with a group called Haggai Institute, and then did some work with a ministry out of Egypt called Stephen's Children. And then the last 10 years, I've been working with a group called Cure International, and the last 10 years have really been exciting for me.
Can you talk a little bit about the work that Cure International is doing?
I will. So for me, I always kind of believed that after I got several years after I'd been out of hockey, I really felt that somewhere along the line that I was going to be given an opportunity to pay back, to give back, because so many parents, men, coaches, professionals had invested in me over my hockey career.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt that it was only fair that something would be expected of me, to kind of pay back. And so Cure International is the leading provider of pediatric, orthopedic, reconstructive surgery for kids in the developing world. We have 8 hospitals. We have programs in another 15, 16 countries. We do about 15, 16,000 surgeries a year, plus I don't know how many clinic calls, probably closer to 100,000 clinic calls we do every year. And when I joined Cure, my responsibility was to lead the international fundraising at Cure, which meant I still did work in the United States, but I was given an opportunity to develop our office and our brand in Canada. And I spent a lot of time in the Philippines, where we built the Tebow Cure Hospital. And I've just been traveling the world a lot, meeting a lot of great people, raising funds to help kids be able to get up, walk, run, play, and go to school, get married, lead productive lives. Some of the things that you, me, millions of others who live in Canada, United States, just almost take for granted. We don't realize what a blessing it has been for us. And so this has been exciting for me to be able to give back.
That's good. We can, when you have that type of passion and your life is focused on meaningful and rewarding work, it's a great way to live. And I greatly appreciate the time you spent with us today. Very motivational. And I love what you're doing now, and I really enjoyed hearing some insights about an excellent career that you had. And again, Randy, thanks so much for your time today, and we hope to stay in touch. And good luck with your continued work with your family and Cure International.
Well, thank you. It's been fun. Like I say, living in the South, I don't get these many opportunities anymore. So this has been a special time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Randy. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Be sure to visit us at prohockeyalumni.org.